have to, have city council approval, we have to have the county approval, and have to refile with the state. So it's not, it'll be a little bit of a process to get it done, but having it reflected here kind of takes out some of that lead time that it would take to go through all these processes to get it done. So we can respond quicker if there needs to be road improvements or that sort of thing to support.
And I know read all this is a lot of text, but essentially what we're going to show you is this is the structure of the document we start bringing together. So when we talk about these land use designations, we are providing some specific guidance on what that means, what it looks like. So how rural residential agriculture should ultimately look or feel, what the purpose is. So we give some specific recommendations or some specific bullet points on that. And that's going to be true for each section. So this is for residential. This will be tied to the residential framework plan, where we've identified some like extra level or kind of another dive down into not only is this area, single family residential, but specifically this is neighborhood maintenance or targeted reinvestment, or we see this as new growth. So each one of these area plans, and again, I know we've talked about these quite a bit, but each one of these area plans are going to be incorporated into the land use plan chapter. Industrial uses, same thing. When we talk about light industrial, heavy industrial, airport, maybe we pull out that Port Authority. This just identifies as part of that area plan for industrial, specifically where industrial infill could occur, where industrial maintenance might occur, targeted reinvestment, growth. So we're just trying to provide that extra level of information or guidance. So when someone comes in to do industrial, they refer to the land use plan, they'll be referring in greater detail to the industrial areas plan. Just for a level of specificity that's helpful to know, what do we want to see in area 3 or area 7. Same thing with commercial, just looking at these area plans, I think will be very helpful. Community facilities gets broken out in its own chapter, so we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes here. And then the parks and open space, same thing, all of that's kind of encompassed inside of community facilities. Downtown sub-area, this was the last time we were back here, we were presenting chapter 4 of the downtown sub-area plan. Based on recommendations from the steering committee, plan commission, and also from city council, we did expand the boundary of the downtown area. So we're up north of 8th Street, which I think is important. I've been convinced that is an area where not only is it, it's not typically or traditionally thought of as the downtown, but they have a relationship and they are interconnected. And some people are going to be up at Johnson Fremont Park, and they're going to get pulled down into the downtown, which is great. That's what we want. We want those connections. So I think incorporating the city auditorium and some of those uses. I won't go into this in detail, but just outlining the historic Main Street, which is that red area in the centers. I think what people typically think of as the downtown. So looking at the rest of these areas and these functional sub areas allows us to provide guidance or recommendations that are specific to each one of these kind of areas in the downtown. What uses are appropriate, setback and building height standards might be a little bit different. So I think that's something we want to make sure we're able to provide some recommendations. What's happening in the industrial edge to the southwest of the downtown is very different than what we want to see along Military Avenue, along the kind of center to the north. So each one of these functional sub areas has a little bit of detail about what we're hoping to see, uses that are appropriate, scale, those types of things. I know it might be tough to see on this map, but there's these yellow boundaries. So here's there's these yellow boundaries where you can see these catalyst sites that we've identified. And some examples of what those catalyst site redevelopment plans are going to look like. They'll look more like what we're seeing on the far right side. Some of these first ones, remember, were just kind of us doing some initial massing to get the group's feedback. I think we beat some of these up pretty good, so we need to make some revisions. But based on that, we'll ultimately prepare something that's closer to what we're showing for military main 8 and D. Again, we don't anticipate this to be 100% what gets built, right? These aren't construction documents. But they are to provide guidance to a developer who might come in, kind of consolidates a couple of blocks, and they have a better sense of what you're trying to accomplish based on the functional land use that we've identified, some of our recommendations. But a visualization is very helpful. A developer can see this. All right, I get it. Commercial closer to military, up next to the sidewalk, want some landscaping. I have flexibility with where my parking is going to go, it could be in the middle or the rear, and then a transition to residential housing type. So it's a bit denser than what's in this area. There are some multifamily options, but we see some real opportunity to get single family attached in this area to just increase the amount of residents that are living in and around the downtown. The urban design framework. The urban design framework just identifies things like monumental gateways, the arch gateway, which we talked about a couple of times, like that idea of having a clear indicator of what it looks like when you're entering or getting close to the downtown, trigger to people or announcing to people that there's a main street they have to turn if they're coming from the east side of town on Military. Same thing if you're coming down Broad Street, you just want to make some kind of designation that's going to pull people into the downtown. So gateways, signage, directional signage, these are great tools for the city to use to just do a better job announcing what you have in the downtown. Parking lot screening, murals, public arts, open or outdoor gathering spaces. These are little things, but over time they make a big difference. I mean, they can really change the look and the feel of your downtown. I think a lot of times when people think about downtowns that they like, it's these little things that start to add up. They're instances, they're moments as you're walking through. It's a nice experience. So over time, those are things you'd like to see, really throughout the downtown, but focused at a couple of these functional sub areas. Transportation framework. I know we spent a lot of time talking about this in our last meeting. I think it's a very exciting concept. A couple of things that we're talking about here, where we're talking about roadway reconfigurations for Broad Street and Military. On Broad Street, we're really talking about more landscaping, really increasing that pedestrian scale and that pedestrian environment, so people feel more comfortable walking up and down, so more south on Broad Street, but also making those east-west connections. That's really important. As a pedestrian and a person who's tried to cross that street a couple times, it's not easy, depending on the time of day that you're doing it. So I think just whatever you can do to not bring traffic to a halt, but to start to slow it down. Some traffic calming measures should be explored along Broad Street. And in Military, we're recommending a road diet. And that's something that's coming out of recommendations from the long-range transportation plan. And it ties in great to some of the recommendations we're talking about in the downtown sub-area. So taking what's a 4-lane road and a road diet, and essentially bringing it down to 3 lanes. So one eastbound, one westbound, with a left turn up the middle. And it opens you up to a couple of things. One, it increases, the ability to incorporate bike lanes. There's some connection opportunities that I think, even in some of the discussions we had last night, people want to see more bike lane connections. East-west, Military would be a great example for that. It will not impact your current traffic capacity. Right now, your traffic capacity doesn't warrant having 4 lanes. So based on the traffic model that we've been using, it's not going to bring traffic to a halt by any means. Just looking at some of those signalized intersections, what improvements can be made there, just again, to get that gateway and wayfinding features in there, but also just make it safer for vehicles, truck traffic, and pedestrians. Whenever those conflict points occur. Yep.
I want to add on to that. I was a little apprehensive about the diet for Military.
Yeah.
And did a little research here. It took me a while to find this, but throughout the years, the state of Nebraska does a traffic count. It used to be on their website. It was really easy to find. And since they've gone to their newer website, I had a heck of a time finding it. I had to Google it. So I found some numbers that they had. This example, Military in Maine in 2000, it's 14,235 traffic counts. Then in 2016, because I'm not going to go through these, they're in 2-year increments, it was down to 2,420, but the year prior, 2 years prior to that, it was 11,008. If I'm thinking maybe, because I was apprehensive, maybe the traffic is actually decreasing along Military, and I got to thinking maybe the reason for that is we don't have a school over there anymore. And I don't know exactly if that's had something to do with that. I don't know where we're at today. I think with the count, because there's no data that I can find right off the top.
We have those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but we have those numbers that are incorporated into the traffic model. And it does a historical evaluation. So what you've been doing over the last 20 years, same numbers that we're pulling from the DOT. Some of them can be a bit more fine-tuned, but yeah, I mean, you're right. And I would imagine a lot of that has to do with some of the roadway improvements that have occurred, what's happened on 23rd, what's happened on Migrate.
Exactly.
Those types of changes can make a big difference. The bypass could impact some of these numbers, but it's definitely not necessary in it isn't warranted to have 4 lanes. It's not bad to have them, but it's just not necessary.
Because I was apprehensive, because I remember this road out here got expanded to the 4 lanes. And anyway, so now with that thing and that thought process there, like you're saying, I guess I'll say it does have merit to it then, in my thoughts today.
Good. I mean, I think it was it was nice that both of our teams, so HDR worked on the transportation plan, and based on what we were talking about for the downtown plan. I think we both did this for different reasons, but we're able to kind of justify with what we've been looking at 8OS. So that's good. Hopefully that's something that we would put on as a project. And I mean, there's a lot of things that need to happen before that happens. Funding would be a big one, but being able to fund that, having it in your comprehensive plan identified as a project is a good start. Truck route and approaches. Talked a little bit about the approaches and how you're going to connect to some of these other destinations that are out and beyond the downtown area. So connecting to other parks, connecting to other civic areas, and then drawing them in with these green spines. These could be areas where I think this is how people could be moving through as a pedestrian. Maybe that's a little bit more pronounced or prominent. And truck route, truck traffic, definitely something that needs to be addressed in the downtown. I know I've said this a couple times now. It's easy to say, it's kind of hard to wait, but I think once the bypass is in, you're sort of in a sit and wait, and you can evaluate once the bypass is complete. People are starting to use it on a more regular basis. It's not going to take all the truck traffic out of downtown. And even if you did establish a truck route, which we recommend doing, you're not removing all the truck route or truck traffic, but you're decreasing the amount of truck traffic that's really using it as a bypass to get through. They're moving through the downtown, they're not going to the downtown. But goods and services being dropped off in the downtown are still going to happen. You're just looking to bring those numbers down. So that's something that we definitely recommend. Last thing, second last thing is just talking about complete streets, which is here is where possible. Let's see if we can kind of reconfigure either what's happening on Broad or what's happening on Military. Looking at these one-way conversions in the downtown, the steering committee brought up a good point. I mean, we'll go back and just triple check that that's a viable solution to convert those one ways. Again, it's not a curb-to-curb revision or update, or you're having to completely rework that street. It's staying with your current back of pavement or back of curb to back of curb, and just reconfiguring that eastbound lane instead of it being southbound or on the east side lane. It could be a one-way north and a one-way south. So you have one lane on both sides. You're not going to get a bike lane or anything in the downtown. So I think this graphic does need to get revised. The main reason is if you have angled parking, you cannot have a bike lane. But there are some other advantages. I mean, now you have cars moving through. It's not as confusing for visitors. So a lot of advantages to removing the one-way system. It's going to require some new signs, some new infrastructure going in place. It's not a signalized area. If it's signalized, that's very cost prohibitive, but you've already moved away from that. You're already in a stop sign solution. So I think that's a very viable solution and one that we should continue to explore. The last part of the downtown is the regulatory strategies. And this will be part of what we're doing in the UDC, is taking these recommendations and seeing what we can carry forward into the UDC format, reevaluating the land uses, what's appropriate, what should be by right, maybe what's a secondary or conditional use, establishing district-specific standards. So again, taking these functional sub-areas, those could potentially be sub-districts within your downtown. Again, it just gives you a little bit more control over maybe what happens in the downtown core versus what's happening on the military versus the industrial. You're able to start to break these apart and get a little bit more specificity for each one of those functional sub-areas. We can explore overlay districts versus new sub-districts. We would update the zoning map as needed, and then we would review and update the sign ordinance, which is something that's already happening as part of the entire UBC update. And there's some additional considerations. These aren't musts. They don't need to happen right away. I would say in reverse order, design guidelines, pattern book, the developer's how-to book. These are just helpful tools for the city to have. It takes probably 80% of the questions you're going to get from developers or property owners about what you're trying to accomplish. They don't have to be onerous. They don't have to be overly complicating or prescriptive. They can just give a little bit more insight on what you're trying to accomplish when you start to see certain redevelopment in the downtown.
Where you leave that chart.
Yes.
What's your plan or what's the process for, you've got one, update the zoning map? So once you've done land use, obviously the next phase is the zoning map, and you have zoning in your UDC that's not going to conform to our current zoning, that if you put the cancellation or conversion. When's that occurring?
It's happening soon, and it would happen in conjunction. Our team would do it. It would happen, working with Jennifer and ultimately working with this group. Going to be a big part of this. And I guess the first part of it is: are we going through a zoning map amendment? Are we just going through? These are the districts that would align with the functional sub areas. So this is our recommendation. So I would say if there's things in here with the functional sub area boundaries that we have questions on, we should be talking about it now, because these could be what.
Once all that is done, then we find out years down the road that we need to change. We can still make changes to, so.
Correct. Yeah, just like you can make changes to the land use plan, or these are documents that can move through the public process at any point. That's a good distinction. I meant to say that earlier. I think it's because these plans aren't perfect. They are living documents. That's a really important aspect of planning, especially the land use plan. Your values or your missions or just opportunities will change. In 5 years, there's going to be a use that you're anticipated. And so I think it's important that over time you continue to, and we'll talk about this in the implementation chapters, you need to continue to evaluate, what does the community want, what are business owners saying, and stuff will change. And you're going to want to start with the land use plan, because then that'll help guide what zoning amendments you need to make or adjustments. We'll be talking about in this chapter a balanced and sustainable growth approach. We'll be getting into the community facilities themselves, infrastructure and utility. There's an energy component, a requirement from the state. We'll talk about the public services and the service areas, parks, open space, and recreation. I would say the main thing, though, to keep in mind is this will be something that we're going to be working with city staff on. Each department may have their own and are wanting to have their own plan for if it's community facilities or parks and open space and recreation. The comp plan is pretty high level. It would do well to have some additional studies below it. So if it's specific to what the community facilities, infrastructure, and utilities need to be, and even a standalone parks and open space and rec document. So we're really tying this back to the land use plan recommendations that we're providing. But it would be just as easy to start pointing to some other secondary documents that would be helpful, and they would be kind of overseen by these different departments. So as I go through this, it's not meant to say these are the community facility plans moving forward. It's more of an assessment of the current facilities, their location, and then as we start to evaluate these against our land use plan, we may identify areas where public services may need to be, either reevaluated or additional uses may need to be added down the line when that development or if that development occurs. But yeah, certainly the community facilities and infrastructure will come up as their own study down the line. That'll be a recommendation in this plan. We've identified some of the we've identified all the community facilities. This chapter, as well as implementation, is still going through a pretty extensive review with city staff. So I would say community facilities, natural areas, and implementation. We're still going through kind of that back and forth process. So this map could slightly change over time. But what we're doing here is just identifying where those facilities are. But when you start to think about what's happening up in the north east side, you're not seeing a lot of facilities. There's about to be a lot of residents up there. Down the line, if development occurs the way we anticipate it to. So some facilities, both on the community facility side and Parks and Rec side, are going to need to be located up there in the future. Parks and Rec, and this is a good example. There's just one thing, I don't have the red. We were talking about in the steering committee meeting when you're up by Ritz Lake. That's not really a public open space. So I would say that whole area is underserved right now by parks and open space. They need access to it. So down the line, you're going to want to see as development occurs, more parks, more open space incorporated into these developments. There's a couple ways to do that. I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. But we're going to go through this map and make some adjustments based on the revised land use plan. Once that's done, you'll be able to see where there's a 10-minute walk to some of these public services, so parks and open space, and where people are way outside of that 10-minute walk. We're trying to get as much of the community, if not all, within that 10-minute walk. That's the ideal. Things we'll be looking at, complete and implement the Rawhide Creek and Elkhorn drainage basin studies. You want to complete and implement the Fremont Stormwater Drainage Manual. Green infrastructure should be used to improve stormwater management. We talked a lot about that. I think there was a lot of feedback from people just through the process about how to handle the water on their site, but also that they're taking on from some of the surrounding sites. So using green infrastructure is one approach to it. It's a helpful approach using a lot of different techniques. Talk about that quite a bit in this chapter. Consider different approaches to expand park access. That can include publicly funded parks. That can include parks being provided through private development. Could be joint ventures. Maybe the developer builds it, and down the line the city takes it on and they're maintaining. A lot of different approaches to this. And again, this is something where I think the Parks and Rec plan that would follow up this document would be very helpful in identifying specifically how that's going to get done. But it is something that needs to be considered in updating the Parks and Rec. Natural areas. Just looking at the Platte River Valley as a whole, Fremont Lakes State National or State Recreation Area. I mean, it's a fantastic asset for the community. So finding ways to connect to it, and then also just taking into consideration when we think about what redevelopment or development might look like, don't want to negatively impact this area in any way. The Platte River and Elkhorn River, those are some significant considerations of the community assets, and just the lake streams, floodplain, and wetlands. Start to think about what some of those challenges are for development and redevelopment. I would say this is not a typical map for a community to have this much floodplain to address or to be as development is occurring. So I mean, those floodways, the orange are definitely areas that you want to be mindful of. But even those yellow areas and that 1% annual chance of flood hazard are pretty significant development challenges. So that's why I was talking about the planning area before. We're very much trying to stay out of that area where we can and plan for some of the lighter colored areas where there's still some floodplain considerations and there's still some challenges, but it's not as significant as the bright yellow and bright orange areas. Considerations, tying even back to what we just talked about in community facilities, those green infrastructure solutions can be very helpful to remove that excess stormwater runoff, detention basins, bioswales, rain gardens, and public spaces and along roads. We want to guide that growth and that lane development to the 500-year floodplain areas. So that's north and east of the current city boundary. We preserve the natural integrity of the areas along the Sandpit Lakes and Platte River. We want to preserve and enhance Indian vegetation coverage throughout the through updated subdivision and site development standards. We're not doing that in the comp plan, but as the team that's working on the UDC, these are considerations that we're already starting to move into based on the UDC process. I won't go into this in a lot of detail, and I mentioned before that HDR is going to be back here in the next month or so, next four or 5 weeks, to talk about this in greater detail, and they'll go through the LRTP, the Long Range Transportation Plan. They'll talk about the Beltway, 30-degree alignment, roadway hierarchy, vehicular and truck traffic, railroads and crossings, public transit, trails and sidewalks. There's a lot of other aspects and topic areas they're going to talk about in the Long Range Transportation Plan. It's a fairly extensive document. The comprehensive plans transportation chapter is really going to touch on these main topic points. These are the ones that we find most relevant to the land use plan, most relevant to what we talk about inside our comp plan. We will be cross-referencing extensively to the Long Range Transportation Plan. It's a very thorough document. I don't want to say anything that is in conflict to that document. But it is important to talk about transportation when you talk about land use. So we're just making sure we're covering all our bases. So these two maps are back here. I find this might be a little bit challenging to look at up here. But we have the two maps over here. We can put them up on some chairs when we're all done. I go through this presentation. We have two maps here tonight, the roadway alternatives and the pedestrian and bicycle alternatives. Again, these are special projects that we've identified over time. They all have some different aspects to why they're a priority, what the overall specifics are for that project. So this will be provided in greater detail when Jason and Jeremy come out here and give their presentation in a couple of weeks. It's kind of like a sneak peek, so you can see how when Jason and I are looking at the land use plan and his transportation plan, we're trying to get these to overlap in a way where your future roads, and your future projects are supporting the type of development that we anticipate. So you don't build these roads and then find out that you're underserving this area or you're overserving this area. So that's a big aspect of what we're trying to do when these two documents are coming together. Roadway alternatives. The bicycle and pedestrian alternatives. We had a pretty good conversation today in the steering committee meeting with some people that are sort of in the know with a lot of the trail connections that are online. So I would anticipate this map changing a little bit, or at least being adjusted based on some of those comments. So we'll make sure to pass that back to HDR, kind of building that into their overall model. But as you can see, we're trying to make some pretty significant connections throughout the community, either through paved trails, either shared roads or side paths. The browner areas that have existing bike networks, there's a couple of areas where the data is, I would say, just slightly. The main one that sticks out to me that I know we got to get is I know there's a bike trail that connects you over, so you can kind of loop up from Military, Linden, and come down to get into the state lakes. That's just the data thing, so we'll get that cleaned up. But there were some really good discussions about how to maybe optimize some of the trail connections with some development that's coming online. Just talking to the right people at the right time might be all it takes. So when Jason comes back, I think this will be slightly adjusted, but I think you can see there's a lot of transportation, both bike and pedestrian, but also roadway improvements that we're talking about. Not a transportation engineer, but if there are any questions here, I can try to address the best that I can. Questions or comments? Last section, one of my favorite sections. It's the implementation section. So we're gonna have 7 chapters of recommendations and big ideas, things that we want to get done here in Fremont. This chapter is about moving forward and implementing. The plan is meant to be a 15-20 year outlook. This plan implementation chapter is all about getting that done. So it's going to be really done in three sections. Plan administration, which is critical. So using the plan commissioners, identifying their role, making sure it's clear what their responsibilities are, and how they're going to be using this comprehensive plan as part of their evaluation process. Just as much, city staff's going to be using this to evaluate projects as they come through. The city council is going to want to reference this. This is the plan commission's document. It's a big aspect of how they make the decisions they're going to make. We'll identify funding sources. We'll talk about some of the continued outreach initiatives. Certainly don't expect you to do as much outreach as you've been doing over the last 2 years, but we do recommend that you kind of keep this going. Reach out every year, maybe twice a year, but at least every year with your community, and just see what's changing. I mean, stuff comes up, and there's new ideas or new thoughts, or a development occurs that kind of makes everybody think about doing this a little bit different. One of the things that I just made this adjustment based on the feedback in our steering committee meeting is local and regional partnerships. I think that's a great idea. We have some good examples of where communities have gone really above and beyond their kind of station in their own community and have connected with surrounding communities to help, either get a trail connection that might be a little bit out of the reach for both of you, but together you can make it happen. Maybe with the county. So I think that's a great idea, and we'll work through what that might look like. Working with some of the smaller communities, you do some pretty amazing stuff. They may have access to funding that you as a city do not, but if you're working together, you can kind of take advantage. We're helping them produce some of these plans, but they're able to seek that funding and get those matches. So I think that's something worth exploring. And then CIP innovation. This is often an overlooked component of a comprehensive plan. It's not going to be us breaking down your annual budget and figuring out what's going to tie to what. But it is important to start tying your plan recommendations to the CIP dollars that you're setting aside. So when you think about those capital improvement projects, what is being realized from the comprehensive plan, tie that back to this implementation chapter. One, it's just great to be successful using this plan and starting to see the changes come out of it. But it also puts some dollars to some of these recommendations. Some are a lot easier than others. If it's a text amendment to a zoning code, pretty straightforward, probably could be done by staff. Multi-million-dollar project for a roadway improvement, it's a bit more challenging, but you need to start setting those funds aside or identifying those funds before you be able to do it. Amendment process with just the annual progress reports, annual amendment process that's going to come through this. There's a standards of review for a land use plan, and then that 5-year update. We always encourage. Typically, states require a 5 or 10 year. Even if you're not required to do it, it's worth kind of dusting off certain pages and reevaluating whether or not these are still your targets. So an update is something that can be done local or can be done in house, or something I have to use a consultant for. And then action matrix. It's going to be like an 80-page document. We're going to try to get in 3 or 4 pages specific actions that are going to draw from all the plan's recommendations. They're not going to read the same way. They're going to be very action oriented. do this and you're going to achieve that goal on page 42. So this is like your checklist. And I love checklists. I love checking stuff off. The goal is you're working through these action items, starting to get stuff done. And you'll see over time, some are more important than others. So we'll identify what those priority projects are. But you'll see over time that these little changes can ultimately affect a pretty big change and get you closer to some of your goals. We'll talk about accountability, also really important in anything you do. But identify who's the partner, who's responsible, what's their role, how do they plug in, when do they plug in. Identifying the right partners for the right actions is really important. We'll make sure that we coordinate with Jennifer and city staff to make sure that we're using the right people in the right ways. This is an important chapter and often an overlooked chapter because it's not as graphic or photo heavy or anything like that. But it really is how you start to implement the recommendations. Next steps. Wrap up. I got one more slide and we can take any questions you have. Next steps, in July, we want to be delivering this draft comprehensive plan for internal staff review. We're close. I mean, it feels close, but there is a lot of work to do. There's a lot of coordination with city staff and departments. As much as this is a planning document, it directly impacts a lot of departments here in the city. We just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the recommendations are saying. There's also this direct pressure with the UDC coming right behind this planning process. So we want to make sure that everything is correct, because it is going to inform development standards, district standards that Ruben and Jackie are working on the UDC side. In August, we'll be working through multiple rounds with the comments for internal discussion with city staff and city departments. August, September, we're going to post a final plan to the project website. We're going to send it to the planning commission, the city council, to the steering committee. And we're going to go through these kind of all in one, not one swoop, maybe two different trips. We'll come out and present in September to the steering committee in a working session. This, what I'll call, is the final comprehensive plan. We'll also present that on the same trip to the planning commission. What'll be different between the steering committee and the planning commission meeting is we'll present the same document. I always feel that's very important that everybody's looking at the same document. But each group that we talk to afterwards is also getting a summary of the feedback that we received. So when we talk to planning commission, they're still looking at document A, but they'll see a summary of the steering committee's comments. We'll get feedback from the planning commission on how they'd like to address those comments, and also any comments that they have on the draft. We go to city council, it's going to be the same document, but you're going to get a summary of what we heard from the steering committee and what we heard from the planning commission. And it's ultimately going to go to the city council to decide how they want to go about some of this. It's important that there's not a lot of different iterations. I think that helps us kind of keep it clear on where we're at. This is our timeline. And I told Jennifer we've been working on this for 18 months now. We're really close. But this last 20% is critical. It's where a lot of the fine tuning and the revisions come into place, the maps and the supporting visualizations start to come into place in a document. So we're really excited to get to this part, but we do have quite a bit of work to still do on this. Say thank you. I know that was a lot to go over. Do you have any questions about the timeline, or do you have any questions about anything specific? Let's sit down so I can start taking notes.
All right. Again, open up for questions. We have some time here. Planning Commission or City Council. Any questions on comments?
The military diet get identified closer to Luther Road than we need. Very closer to downtown, we're talking about a diet. I'm wondering if those are kind of in conflict at this point.
So I think that was something, and I know that's something we had talked about with DCR, and they're just picking up different traffic patterns. But that's something we can look at and just make sure that they're not in direct conflict. I think they're going in two different directions in terms of why that traffic is occurring. A lot of people are heading that direction for different uses. If you get closer to a downtown, I know this is it's not always a great thing for people to hear, but I think it's important. It's okay to slow down traffic by the downtown a little bit. I mean, we don't want to come to a halt, but you want people to start to slow down and experience the downtown, see the downtown. And again, with the traffic counts where they're at, it's warranted to at least explore in greater detail. So we've set it up in terms of what our overview is and what we would recommend. a detailed traffic study. We would recommend a detailed traffic study before you go too far. But based on the long-range transportation plan model and comprehensive plan, but I'll make sure I talk to HDR and make sure we're not crossing any wires.
But same thing, and one person complained already. Heading west on Military, into Broad, trying to get on Broad, take left. Sit through 2 or 3 lines.
So say that again, so I don't misunderstand.
They're going west on Military, they're trying to take a left onto Broad Street.
So,
So they're going south.
Okay, yep.
And at the light, turning light, they've already had to stop, sit there 2 or 3 times. Bring that light, just to
I
get
gotcha.
through. With this diet, it's gonna make it work.
I would think it could make it easier because you would be having a more dedicated left turn going a longer distance along the road. So that might have impacts on making a left-hand turn as you travel a little bit further to the east down Military. But I would say that's the kind of traffic analysis that would be done as part of the study. If it determined that, yeah, right now people are doing a 2 or 3 cycle and now it's 5, then I would say that would get knocked out.
Right now, it's 3 cars, the left, 3 cars make it through.
Like that tells me your left turn there at Military going southbound on Broad is just not far enough back. And a lot of times that happens because the way the road jogs, the next left-hand turn coming the other direction starts, right? Someone wants to turn up. And maybe that goes away. It might be harder to make a left if you're heading eastbound down Military down the line. You might have to go an extra block and move back. But in terms of a priority, I would say making a left on Broad is more important than maybe some of these.
I might add on to that as far as that regard, because I know I use that signal periodically. And it may be because of how the state road department has that traffic counter, or the controller is set up. So basically what that does by going to this center turn lane is it allows more stacking in the turn lane.
Right.
In that, but as far as the amount of traffic moving that direction, it's the signal that warrants or dictates how many cars are going through the time cycle then.
that's actually one of those things that we're not gonna know until the.
Until the study's
goes
done.
through.
Yeah.
And that should change when that is no longer part of Highway 77.
It might take such a.
It should, but
We don't know yet.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying this is what would happen, but when I'm just looking at a map, just to orient, just to make sure I say the right things, but it might make making a left-hand turn going eastbound on Military on Park more difficult. That left-hand turn could be reduced, that lane depth, just so you have a larger setback. You could accommodate more cars for cars that are heading westbound on Military trying to make a left on Broad. So again, those are things that could be worked through on a transportation study or traffic study.
and turning north onto Park from Military, I don't think it's something that is very.
It's not as critical, exactly, and that's what I'm saying, like, you might, maybe now you're just pushing people down to Main Street to make their left-hand turn, which actually works out well, because we're talking about a key intersection improvement at Main and Military, so again, that becomes a more prominent intersection, and now that Park and Military intersection is more about pedestrian. I think that's something we talked about as a pedestrian connection, trying to get people up into Johnson Fremont Park and bringing them into the downtown. So again, it's for a lot of reasons, it seems like a great idea. For some of these challenges, you just want to make sure you don't break it, right? I don't want to break the infrastructure. So the goal.
I mentioned, I didn't hear the word as we went through here, but I know it's in the comp plan, and that has to do with drainage and open waterways within the city. Old comp plan had some instruction in it that said we were going to get rid of open waterways throughout the city. We could do it relative to the amount of water that flows through the Fifth Street ditch and on out to the power plant, so you wouldn't have open waterways. But are you addressing, I know we have separate drainage down there, I'm just wondering if any of your work touches on any of that, since the old comp plan did.
So we evaluated some of those recommendations, and those are the types of recommendations that have gotten passed through that we're currently working on with the city before we kind of have any final final document. But I also think that's where it might start to fall into a different department's document, right? Because there's so much the comp plan needs to get into. Start getting into detailed drainage studies or specifications, becomes less of a land use plan responsibility. Yeah, I mean,
I wasn't really suggesting that your plan needed to have that drainage detail in it, whether or not you were actually just considering some of the ramifications of covered ditches versus open gives you opportunity for the bike lanes and other kinds of things where those waterways today inhibit some of those kinds of. I just didn't know whether or not there was any integration at all.
oh, that's a good point, though. I'll make sure based on the feedback that we received from the city, that's a consideration. So if that's the direction you're going, it does open up a couple opportunities for.
I want to add on to that, what I understand, because what Brad's talking about, as far as closing some ditches, I'm not sure how much the Corps of Engineers let you do that today.
Yeah,
And maybe you can check on that part of that.
that's, I think that was one of our comments that's in it. I'm curious to see, sorry, I'm sharing my comment. Curious to see what the feedback is from the city, and if that is something that we want to continue to explore, because a lot of departments are moving quick.
Yeah, I think actually that the two drainage studies that are going on right now, the one on the Rawhide as it comes into Fremont, and then one as it goes out of Fremont into the Elkhorn Valley, will touch on improvements in those areas. And that's really, once we have the results from that study, that's something to incorporate into the comprehensive plan and not the other way around. We need to incorporate that detail. And I think they're getting pretty close to some recommendations on these studies.
But the timing won't be such that we'll get it into this version, it will come later.
It'll come later, and that's certainly an amendment we can make to the comprehensive plan, but really, I think that those documents will have their standalone recommendations, you know, for drainage improvements on their own. And again, I think what the comp plan would say, the recommendation, the goal, the action would be to tie into the recommendations of those studies, because that's the expert advice rather than us trying to guess what that might be.
That's the reason that, two reasons that I brought it up. One, I live along one of those waterways, and two,
Sure.
we've had citizens that live along Claremont where the city already filled in the Rawhide passageway, but didn't do anything with that ground, and they don't really like the way we've approached just half filling the ditch.
That could be encompassed in some sort of biking or walking path or whatever. It's half full today. It isn't a major waterway.
I didn't catch the Claremore area there. What are you talking about as far as filling in or whatever?
From Military up to what is it? 16th Street.
16th.
That's an open ditch.
There's a reason I found out why that got filled. And if you go up to 16th Street, you'll see that the flow used to go north up to 19th Street, and they changed that subdivision area there to drain south to your end of town. And so what they did, because it was concrete line still there, they filled in to change the flow from south to north, go north to south now. What's happened there? I found out a number of years ago.
Talked about this comp plan adoption. So how much later is the UTC adoption?
It's a tricky question. So it really does depend on the next rounds of revision, both here. I guess I was going to ask, and that kind of leads me to, I'm not trying to dodge the question, I'll come back to it, but I hope this document is very familiar as you've been walking through it. I mean, you should see your fingerprints all over it. I feel like we've gone through a lot of iterations and gotten very close to where we're currently at. We're very close to a final plan. There are, as I said, components we still need to work out. There's some coordination with city staff. We got to get this into an actual document. If in this next round, so when we're back here in September and October presenting this, and it all seems like it's on track, I would think, Moose Jackie was here, but I'll put words in her mouth. I would think we're only 4 to 6 months, would you say, Jennifer, from potentially being able to adopt the UDC. I know that's probably not as fast as we would all like. I said this to the steering committee, and I think it's an important consideration is I've spent about 18 months on this project, and once we've adopted it, we'll be 2 years in. These last couple months are critical and don't want to rush it. I think it's important to do this the right way. We spend so much time on it. It's, another month or two. I know we'd like it to be done sooner, but it's important that we get it there. And more so because typically what would happen after a comprehensive plan is you go up for RFP, you start, maybe a year from now, you go up for RFP and try to get your UDC updated. That normally takes 3 to 4 years after a typical comp plan is done. They're only 6 months away. And I think it's important that we get everything worked out in the comp plan, get it adopted, and then where Ruben and Jackie are now, they're like right there on the edge. They can't push much further out without starting to guess where some stuff might be happening or how it might be going. But once we get this adopted, I mean, they're really starting to fine tune the district standards, the development standards, process and procedures. There's a lot that still needs to be done. But instead of having a UDC in 3 years or 4 years, you'll have it in 6 months is the goal. So.
Yeah, we have several of the chapters that have gone through my initial review, and now we have, we provided those initial chapters to the Planning Commission to review. The Planning Commission chair referred those to a subcommittee like he did with the land use plan. We are looking through those and kind of highlighting areas where there may be some potential changes or some concern or some questions that we want to go back and say, hey, can you explain this to us? Or we think it ought to be this way, blah, blah, blah. So the Planning Commission's doing their job that way. At the steering committee, there were a couple members who expressed concern, or that might be too strong of a word, but that they want to have opportunities to really look at and talk about signage and landscaping and setback issues in the commercial and industrial areas. So we want to make sure that as we go through this process, that everybody has a chance to comment and touch on it. So we find something that's comfortable for Fremont, and instead of a year or two down the road, having to make a bunch of changes. So we want to make sure we take the time to do that.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we went, I wasn't here, so I can't speak directly to this, but there was a committee, and I don't believe it was the steering committee that may have been developing the comp plan, the UDC. That work was going on, but we have on our website a group that was lack of better words, a proven committee for the UDC. And their task was to take specific examples of implementation of certain kinds of construction, building, whatever. They were supposed to have tested that with a bunch of examples to make sure that that's all kind of what we expected. Is that kind of a committee going to do that kind of work relative to implementation of this before this comes to Planning Commission and Council?
We're approaching it differently than the past UDC was approached. I wasn't here at that time either, so my understanding is the same company that did our last comp plan was hired to develop the UDC. They developed a document that was 2 planning directors ago. It was a much thicker, broader document than what was approved. So the first planning director worked through them with that document. Then he went away and the position was open for a period of time. And then my predecessor was there. He was under a lot of pressure just to get something approved. About half of the document was locked out of it. And then they went through with this committee. So this is a very different process. We're trying to take the comprehensive document, get feedback from the Planning Commission, who under state statute is charged with reviewing and developing the comprehensive plan and the zoning regulations. We want to make sure that we touch base then with members of the community at the appropriate times to make sure that, yes, it still makes sense, that it's not prohibitive to growth. I mean, for example, when Jackie was here the last time, there was the example of the duplex lots and the recommendation in the UDC that everything come in from either an alley or that the garages be behind. Well, the way the lots have been developed in Fremont, that won't work. And It also increases impervious surface if you add the alleyway. So that's an example of good feedback that we've gotten through this process. So we're working to try and get that kind of feedback so that we have a document that works moving forward once it's adopted.
Subcommittee you're talking about, I asked to be dissolved. That was true, because it didn't work. There was too many personality conflicts and it was too much pressure for the last director to get it correct.
Well, just to be direct, I think, yes, it's very possible that the UDC be adopted at the end of the year or very early next year. A lot of that is review time and process, things that are ultimately out of our hands, but I think it's very.
Agreed, so, and I'm not asking to rush the process, I'm just curious, I just what your thoughts for the timeline was, because I agree, we want to do this the right way.
If we're 4 to 6 months after the adoption of this plan, getting UDC adopted, I would honestly consider that a huge success, and it's still faster than it ever would have been if you didn't do it at the same time. It's also being done by Ruben and Jackie. I meant to introduce Ruben. This is his first time in Fremont, but he's been working on this project really since the inception when we started. So he and Jackie do a lot of our zoning projects, and they are a big part of the zoning team. So he's been working on the comp plan for the last year as well. So he has a real strong knowledge of the community, which is not something we typically get to say, jumping into the UDC. So I do think there's benefits there.
Yeah, I can maybe just touch on how the UDC had it go where we have a fairly recent plan like we will have in the fall here that's recently adopted, and it queues up us as a group to be able to draft the UDC pretty quickly and review it, and then there's sometimes a review process that goes for months, sort of refining and tweaking. I think like Jennifer was saying, some points, just because you're putting plan recommendations into law, and it's more black and white, so to speak. So that's a process that can go for a while, but
any other window? Maybe 5 more minutes. We have 6:45. Yeah. Any other questions or comments, suggestions? I asked this to the steering committee. Was there anything that we talked about where it seemed like off base, or like, whoa, where did that come from? What do we see? It all seems familiar. I'm hoping it all seems very familiar. Talk about the last.
all right, thank you very much, Nick, Ruben, for being here. Welcome to your first time in Fremont. Hope you had a good time so far. Yeah. Contributed to the sales tax, spent some money. If there's no other comments, questions, we'll take a motion to adjourn from the city council. Okay. Tyler?
Ellis.
Yes.
Ganem.
Yes.
Yerger.
Yes.
Jensen.
Yes.
Sukram.
Yes.
Legband. Vaughn.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, then the planning commission.
All they can do is adjourn without a quorum.
Okay. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, that's pretty good, right? Get out here earlier than you thought.
That's all right. We'll do like we're.
Okay.
So when somebody's at the podium, they're gonna try to turn on that mic, and that's just the best that we can do.
Okay. They just need to come up to the
They ask
podium.
people to speak louder.
Glad you're here.
I'm glad that you went to move that. You know, I mean, you have to be great.
Yeah, they're really trouble doing the full
Oh,
speed.
it does.
Yep, it should be ending good.
All right, good evening, everyone. The time is 7 o'clock. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll go ahead and open up the meeting. Time is 7 o'clock. Open Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. This time we'll have roll call.
Please cast your vote for roll call. Seven council members are present, Mayor.
Okay. Next is mayor's comments. I don't have any specific comments tonight, so we'll go ahead and move on to item 1, which should be motion to adopt the current agenda for the June 14th, 2022 regular meeting. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I take a motion to approve the agenda. Councilman Jensen,
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda.
Councilman Legban,
Well, second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to public hearings. Item 2, resolution 2022-094, recommending approval of a class 1 liquor license application of Corman BB LLC doing business as Black Label at 1755 North Bell Street. This time we'll have staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The notice for the public hearing was published on June 3rd of this year. This is for a Class I liquor license. There are reports. There's the application, then the planning report and police report in the backup. They're providing a positive recommendation on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? If there are none, I take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Sukram,
I'll make the motion for resolution 2022-094 for approval.
Councilwoman Ganem,
I second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. All items in the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or a citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Any items to be removed from the consent agenda? I'm going to remove items 15 and 16. Councilman Yerger.
I just need to ask legal before I would remove item 9. I'm a stockholder in Lumen. Minor. I assume I don't have conflict, but I wanted to at least disclose and make sure that I can vote.
For that one, I'd recommend abstaining from.
Okay, then I'd ask to pull item 9.
Okay. Councilman Vaughn. Okay. Are there any other items? Okay, seeing none, I'd take a motion to approve the consent agenda. Items 3 through 8, 10 through 14. Councilman Yerger, you're on.
So I'll make that motion.
Okay. Councilman Legban.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 9, resolution 2022-096 to accept the quote from Lumen to provide licensing and configuration to migrate the Fremont Dodge County 911 host equipment to the Nebraska Emergency Services IP network. We have Shelley Holzerlin here as our communications director.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, Shelley Holzerlin, 911 Director for Fremont Dodge County. This item is the approval of a quote from Lumen to migrate the 911 center to the Nebraska Emergency Services IP network. The state is building an IP network that will connect all of the 911 centers together, allowing for better location on 911 calls, easier transfer, easier to back each other up. And this contract allows us to prepare our center as well as our other hosts and our partners in our region to move towards that end goal. So this is about.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. We took this off because of the abstention. So I would guess I would take a motion in regards to this item for approval. Councilman Legman.
I make a motion to approve resolution 2022-096.
Councilman Jensen.
I will second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-0 with one abstention, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to item 15 is move to confirm appointment of Brian Monahan as fire captain per recommendation. Again, I wanted to take this item off the agenda. Wanted to recognize Brian Monahan as my appointment tonight for fire captain. Brian's not able to be here, but again, appreciate his commitment to the city of Fremont, his willingness to step in as our new fire captain. So even though Brian's not here, I just wanted to recognize this appointment and mark it. And again, thanks for his commitment to the city of Fremont. I would take a motion to approve Brian Monahan as our fire captain. Councilman Jensen.
I'd like to make that motion, but first I would like, in the interest of disclosure and transparency, Brian Monahan is my nephew. I just wanted to say that regardless of how much grief that causes him. And I would make the motion to approve this appointment.
Councilman Sukram,
I'll second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Congratulations to Captain Monahan. Moving on to item 16, another appointment. Move to confirm appointment of Terry Luthi as fire lieutenant per my recommendation. Again, similar to Brian, have on tonight's agenda Terry Luthi as our fire lieutenant. Very pleased to be able to bring his name forward. Again, these go through civil service and Terry is going to do a fantastic job within our fire department. And I thank him for his willingness to step up as well. So I would take a motion to approve Terry Luthi. Councilman Vaughn.
Motion to approve.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
And Terry, Lieutenant Luthi is here with his family, right? Why don't you stand up and be recognized? Again, congratulations to both of those appointments. All right, moving on to item 17, Council Member Yerger item, motion to approve the scheduling of a formal study session for June 21st, 2022 at 6 p.m. at City Hall. Councilman Vaughn.
So I'm not debating the merit of whether or not we may need to have this formal study session. I very well think it could come to that, but it's my understanding that we're going to be talking about this at our next council meeting on the 28th. And I'm just wondering if this isn't a little premature. Maybe we would be better served to entertain something on the 5th of the following month. That way we can see what happens at the next council meeting and go from there.
Okay. Councilman Legman.
Yes, I want to follow up on that too. Absolutely. We heard everybody's concern. Most of us all been out there. We've heard your concerns. I talked to staff when I heard about the maybe have this meeting. I talked to staff and asked them what they thought, and they are working on it, and they're going through the process. So right now they're going through the process, trying to figure out what we can and cannot do. And it isn't completed. It isn't even near completion. So I want to make sure that it will be on the next city council and it will be addressed the next city council agenda. So I really don't think we need it. It will be on the next agenda and it will be addressed. With that, I would like to make a privileged motion to continue this to the next city council meeting.
Okay, Councilman Ellis.
I wanted to talk. I'm not going to second it.
Okay. Legal, what it's.
Yeah, I guess it's a motion to continue. So
There's a motion to continue. Okay, so we got to address that motion. Okay, there's a privileged motion to continue. Okay, is there a second? Councilman Vaughn.
I will second.
Okay. Cast your votes to continue.
Motion carries 5-2, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to unfinished business, resolution 2022-089, awarding the contract for the sanitary sewer repair 2022 project. I have a report from Troy Shaven.
Troy Shaven, Assistant General Manager. I brought this to you at the last meeting. It was continued because we didn't have the specifications, the provisions of the construction contract in there. To include those two documents. They were sent to legal. I can answer.
Councilman Yerger. Okay. Any questions for staff? Okay. Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, if there's any additional comments from council, if there are none, I would take a motion in regards to this item. Councilwoman Ganem.
Moved.
Okay, Councilman Sukram. Okay, cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 19 is ordinance 5616, approving a change of zone from R rural to LI light industrial, generally located 850 feet north of 32nd Street and 1,500 feet south of County Road T on the west side of Jaeger Road. This would be for final reading.
Evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the final reading for the ordinance to change the zoning on this property from rural to light industrial. You did approve the comprehensive plan amendment and the conditional use permit for storage on May 10th. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Thank you. Seeing none, any comments from the public? Any additional comments from council? If there are none, I'd take a motion to hold final reading. Councilwoman Ganem.
I move to hold third and final reading of ordinance 5616.
Okay. Councilman Jensen.
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Now have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally located on the west side of Jaeger Road, approximately 850 feet north of 32nd Street and 1,500 feet south of County Road T from rural LI to light industrial, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability and providing an effective date on final reading.
Okay, cast your final vote, ordinance 5616.
Mayor, the ordinance is approved 7-0.
Item 20, ordinance 5618, amending section 11-614.02 to allow chain link fence up to the property line in a front yard. This would be final reading. And we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is a request to allow the Planning Commission to grant an exception to allow chain link fences in a front yard setback in certain circumstances. At our last meeting, we discussed some additional language, and I've added that in your packet. It's underlined with the red line, but this is in blue. So the additional language states the Planning Commission may hold a public hearing to grant the special exception. And then underneath that, it talks about public notification will be provided as required by Nebraska revised statutes 1994 and 905, which requires the public hearing to be published in the newspaper and either a sign placed in the general vicinity of the action or a letter of the public hearing to be sent to the property owners within 300 feet. And then finally, the very last section adds that any aggrieved citizen may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council within 10 days of the action of the Planning Commission. And I haven't heard back from anybody, but I think that covers everything that we talked about at our last.
Councilman Jensen.
I just want to thank you for the work that you did on this and reviewing this extra language. It does allow for public around to understand and see what's going on so they don't get blindsided by anything. I appreciate the work you did on this and thank you very much.
Councilman Ellis.
I too appreciate you taking our suggestions and changing that. I have one question for legal. We don't really give the planning commission any criteria on which to approve or disapprove. We just simply say, forgive me for it has to fit in with the neighborhood. I think that's so there's really no stipulations there on what to approve and what not to approve. So I'm thinking first of all, I don't think this is probably going to happen once every 10 years. I mean, this is something that's not going to happen that often. But if it does happen, we have the ability to get ourselves in trouble by saying you can have it, you can't have it, because the guidelines that we're giving the planning commission are not really solidified. It's really opinion based, is it not?
So the criteria for approval that's included in the section, it is, I guess, broad based in the sense that it gives the planning commission some discretion. As long as the decision by the planning commission is justified by that, and it wasn't arbitrary and capricious, and there's no showing of any type of animus or discrimination.
So because it's so broad, you don't have a problem with us putting that in our ordinance and giving a very broad spectrum so that the planning commission could say yes here and no there.
No, the statute just says it has to have criteria. The state left it broad-based, so we put it in here broad-based.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Yerger.
I have a couple of issues here that I wanted to address. Again, I did see that you made some accommodation for suggestions made by Councilman Ellis, I think largely at the last meeting. So thanks for that. I do think that I agree with Councilman Ellis with regards to the criteria listed in section E sub D double I, the criteria for approval. And it says that the proposal must be compatible with the surrounding area. That's in sub I. That's pretty broad. And I'd like to recommend to council that we at least tighten it up for a couple of reasons. First of all, when we go over to the next page and we open up the opportunity for any adjacent property owners to come in with a complaint, that is, they don't like the fact that the planning commission gave an exemption. So they have a right in 10 days to come to council and appeal the way this is written. To me, I'm not a lawyer, but to me, that changes the emphasis from the applicant who went before planning commission to now it is the adjacent property owner that is now the pleading party in front of council. You're shifting the burden from being the person that wanted the fence over to the person that doesn't want the fence when they come to council. I'm not sure why we would shift the burden. And in order to make sure that the planning commission actually takes into account the concerns of any adjacent property owners that might abut this fence, because fences have two sides. And whether or not the adjacent property owner is amenable to that fence or not is not something that gets necessarily recognized in the code that we have here, except broadly. So at the end of section D sub I that's underlined for change, where it says proposal is compatible with surrounding area, I'd like the council to consider adding this statement at the end. And the adjacent property owners were provided adequate notice and have not presented compelling objection. That's the opportunity where the neighbors could come and make their first objection to planning commission. Planning commission could still rule in favor of the applicant for the fence, and they can take it to the council in 10 days. But one of the criteria for the planning commission then has to be that they ruled that the adjacent property owners had no compelling argument. That's their decision. And now they have given some teeth to what comes to council. We assessed the adjacent property owners complaint, didn't find it valid. Therefore, we awarded the exemption. I think that tightens that up substantially. It still puts the onus on the adjoining neighbor to come and make the complaint at council, which I'm not sure that I agree with. I would wish the applicant was making that pleading to council rather than the opposing party. But at least this would give some criteria. So I would like to do that as an amendment. And I'd like that treated separately, if you would. My other amendment is, and I've been a believer of this, I think I said it in the last several readings on this item. I believe that even though the planning commission may be given exemptions elsewhere in city code to act on behalf of city of Fremont with regards to our municipal code laws, I think that is a responsibility for council. And would like to recommend that the planning commission may hold a public hearing and recommend to council a special exemption be allowed, and they do all that due diligence. But the final change to city code should come from council. So I would recommend two amendments. The first one that I articulated earlier, and at the beginning of this, I would say the planning commission may recommend for council approval a special exemption. So I'd like those two amendments separately considered.
Mayor, I just want to jump in briefly. That first one about the objections, Councilman Yerger actually liked that idea. Did you say adjacent property owner presenting objections, or did you want to say aggrieved citizen?
Well, aggrieved citizen would be fine. I was particularly concerned about somebody that puts up a fence. There's two sides to the fence.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to make an argument about your side of the fence and the maintenance thereof and the detractions thereof. Certainly other members of the community in that area might object too. So if you want to broaden it to, what did you say?
Well, aggrieved.
Aggrieved.
So the code section on appeals to council 11-317.05 references that an appeal may be brought by any person or entity that is aggrieved by the decision appealed. And that's, I think, where the language for aggrieved citizen got put in there.
Okay, I'm happy to amend my recommended amendment from adjacent property owner to aggrieved citizen if that fits better with legal's recommendation. And I'd be willing to do that. So I will.
Okay. Councilman Ellis. Sorry. Okay. I want to get to the amendments. I mean, if we want to jump ahead of this, I want public comment if that's agreeable to, I'd take any comments from the public on this. Seeing none, then I'll go to the amendment. So there's an amendment on the floor to change the first amendment to add additional language in regards to the grievance process, correct? Okay, so the motion and the second. Okay. Why don't we, let's, yes.
So it would be at the end of the paragraph D1, E sub little d sub I. At the end of that sentence where it says compatible surrounding area, the language would say, and the aggrieved citizens were provided adequate notice and may not have presented compelling objection. That gives some status to the planning commission for making a decision.
Did you get that, Tyler?
Yeah.
Tyler's the one that's got to put this in.
I could write it out for you.
I think I got it.
He's got it. Okay. Okay, Councilman Legman.
Yes, I have no problem with these. I just want to ask staff, are they okay with? Okay.
Okay, First Amendment. Cast your votes. Councilman Ellis seconded it.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
Okay, then you have another amendment on the floor in regards to,
The second amendment is in that same subparagraph at the beginning where it says the planning commission may hold a public hearing too, and it says grant. And I would change the wording from grant to recommend to council special exemption.
Councilman Jensen.
I've just asked legal, what exactly defines an aggrieved citizen? Can somebody who doesn't like Bob that lives 2 miles away decide he's aggrieved?
Right, that would go into the consideration that the council would use on the appeal. I guess that wouldn't be necessarily a valid objection that for the previous amendment. And then as long as the council followed the criteria, they would dismiss that appeal. But that, you're right, it is a very you could be aggrieved by the color of the fence, you know, you could claim to be aggrieved, so.
Okay, we're on the Second Amendment. Are there any comments from council? Is everybody clear on the amendment? Councilwoman Ganem?
No, I'm just going to ask to re-explain what it does again. And reread it for me again, please.
Councilman Yerger, go ahead and explain your Second Amendment.
It basically puts the final decision with regards to the special exemption in the hands of the council from a recommendation obtained from the planning commission who heard this matter. So the language will say the planning commission may hold a public hearing to recommend to council a special exemption to allow a chain link fence within the front yard, blah, 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 for the rest of the paragraph.
Okay. Comments? Take us. Is there a second? Okay, seeing none, that dies for lack of second. So I would take a motion to approve ordinance 5618 as amended and hold final reading. Councilman Jensen?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to hold final reading of amended ordinance 5516.
5618.
I'm sorry, 5618.
Okay, Councilman Sukram?
I'll second that.
Okay, cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
Okay, we'll have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11, zoning, subdivision, and site development, Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading.
Okay. Okay, hold, cast your final vote on this is ordinance 5618.
Mayor, the ordinance is approved 66-1.
Okay, moving on to item 21, ordinance 5615, amending chapter 5, article 4 of the Fremont Municipal Code, sections 5-406 parking, business district hours prohibited, 5-421 parking, public parking lots. This would be final reading. I'll have staff report.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of council, Jody Sanders, City Administrator. This is the proposed final reading of ordinance 5615. First, we need to ask you to consider amending the ordinance from the second reading. And what we've done is we've added back the allowance for the 2-hour parking during the daylight hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday in the downtown area. I've also adjusted the boundaries for that purpose, trying to incorporate all of the parking lots that are available in the downtown area. But you'll notice that we've also added a line to say that shall not apply to public streets within the downtown area that are directly in front of residential single-family homes. Because with widening that the boundaries, we very definitely have residences in that area. And so we would not prohibit them from parking more than 2 hours in their right in front of their homes. The second, I don't believe that we made any changes to the section 5-421 on the parking. That is removing the restrictions to public parking lots that are located in the downtown area. Council member Yerger has some proposed changes, and I would yield the floor to him if I'm allowed.
Go ahead, Councilman Yerger.
Well, so after going through several readings on this and having been assured that the documents that have been placed in the record twice before with regards to options would be considered or incorporated, I ended up having to put these in separately once again, despite Mr. Sullivan's statements that they would be incorporated or treated as an option A, B. That's the precursor here. But I want to highlight the differences, which is in the packet material, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. I hope that the council has looked at it. Both the version that the staff has prepared and option B address the 2-hour on-street business parking hours during business hours. So there's no differences there. The difference in 406 with regards to option A versus option B, option A opens up general street parking to the general public overnight completely. My belief was that we were doing this code change to specifically deal with residential tenant parking downtown, to be an advocate for doing that, and I certainly am. And I went beyond that in my proposal to do more than just on-street parking for those that would lease living space. I understood that some building owners and some building lease tenants wanted the same privilege to be able to park commercial vehicles or whatever in front of their buildings at night. So that was incorporated. So 406 was relaxed to deal with that rather than to open it up to the entire general public. Section 421 was revised again to relax parking, and basically, as I understand option A, it opens up to general public parking 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without restriction. The 421 proposal that I have in option B opens up to the general public, those city-owned parking lots downtown for overnight parking, but it would be subject to an 18-hour limit. And the rationale for the 18-hour limit is it provides you a means of at least policing that area and having those stalls opened up somewhat. So an example would be if you come in and park at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, or whatever at night, you wouldn't have to be out of the parking garage, which is likely be the covered parking garage, till 10 o'clock the next morning. That parking garage is also supposed to be for business activity, for business retail services, not just for tenant parking. So having some kind of a time limit seemed to make sense. The 18-hour limit came from the city statutes with regards to that's the time limit you can park in a city street in front of your own house. So it would encompass the general parking, but there would be some restriction with the time limit. Both 406 and 421 retain statutory language with regards to law enforcement's ability to ticket and tow. It's not totally reliant on section 408. They actually have provisions, and I know that Chief Elliott has told me repeatedly, if you don't have it in code, I can't ticket and tow. So even if it's repetitive, it's helpful to have it into code. So 406 and 421 and option B retains that language. It was originally in 406 anyway and was added to 421 to match. The only other change in option B has to do with section 408. And 408 specifically addresses streets. The police authority, chief of police authority on the city streets of Fremont. Doesn't give him any authority in the public parking lots today. I think that language is remiss if we're opening up the parking lots for policing in that regard. So I think there are changes, although they're somewhat minor, that need to be there. I'm glad that, and those are the differences. It's basically, do you want general parking everywhere downtown with no restrictions, no time limits, or do you want to have some time limits? And do you want to have some authority given to the city of Fremont through the police department to ticket and tow in those circumstances? Whether it's policed or not is not the question here. It's whether or not by complaint, the police department can actually ticket and tow. And I think we need to be careful about opening up so that we have that capability was still within the city's control. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for downtown residential parking. I'm in favor of it. I just think we need to be careful as we proceed. The last thing that I would say here has to do with the designated business district area. And I'm cognizant of the fact that The city outlined, I guess, the general BID district, which is the accessible level of where we would put up signage. And we wouldn't necessarily have to put up signs in all of those areas. We don't today. At the behest of council at the last meeting, I had some language that subsetted that business district. I took it out because some felt my proposal was too lengthy. So I eliminated that in hopes that we would just put signs up where we feel necessary in the downtown business district. We don't put no parking signs on Park Street, for example, south of like 4th Street. We don't have no parking over on, excuse me, that's 8th Street. And we don't have any parking signs like that in those residential areas today. So I think we're doing a pretty good job of putting up the signs. So I took that out of mine at Councilman Legman's, I think, request. So that's what we have. Those outline differences are really the significance. General parking everywhere or not, and enforcement capability or not. So thank you for considering option B as an alternative to option A this evening.
Councilman Ellis.
Appreciate Jody, the work that's been put into this. This is very important to downtown. And so I don't really want to rush into this. And I know we've been talking about it for a long time. So I want to get an understanding. So right now the proposal is on-street parking, 2-hour limit from 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday. Is there parking on the street then throughout the evening and night? Is that kind of what you're saying? And then once 9 o'clock in the morning hits, the 2-hour starts, they got to move their car by 11 on a street. In a parking lot, there is no restrictions. I can take my RV down there and park it, or my car down there and park it in a parking lot and leave it there forever. Whereas I can't do that in the front of my house. I can only, so that's where I think that there's a little bit of adjustment here. We need to add some sort of a time frame that's going to give our police officers the ability to say, yeah, this car's been here for 72 hours. I think it's been abandoned and we need to do something with it. So that's kind of my only thought here. And then I would like to make this proposal. Let's get this ironed out tonight, the details. And maybe not vote on it tonight, but let it float it out there for the citizens to digest it, to understand it. And then, because there is no hurry. I mean, we're not having 505 people until September. So I just would like the BID to kind of look at it and say, yeah, this looks good. It looks like we've modified it a little bit. I think we've taken care of all the issues. So I'm just putting that out as an option. Thank you.
Councilman Legman.
Yeah, Jody, with your plan, the police have some bite. There is complaint driven. They can go and tow if a car's been there a long time, or if someone puts their junker there or is there for a long period of time. Complaint driven, does the police have the authority to go tow it?
I believe that they do in section 408. We also have a separate ordinance further down that talks about abandoned vehicles and that kind of thing. And if it were exceeding a certain time limit, that would be applicable in that case. One of the reasons why we chose not to put a time limit on the proposal was the event that you have someone that's living in a downtown apartment, husband and wife, each has their own car. If they were to take even a week's vacation, if we put that for even a 48-hour time limit, they would come back to having their car towed somewhere. And I don't think, it strikes me as not being very friendly to downtown residents to say, sorry, you have nowhere to leave your vehicle while you're out of town. That was the crux of the question, is what do you do when people travel? And that's why in the ordinance I'm providing, that's why we didn't have a time limit.
Councilwoman Ganem.
I know there's been a lot of discussion. I've been trying to listen as well from both sides. And how often do you go on a week or 2 week vacation and leave your car? When I lived in an apartment, I wanted to take my car somewhere else anyway, because I didn't want to leave it in the parking lot, simply because it would not be moved. And they would know that I'm gone. And who knows what happens to cars when they're unattended. So just for safety factor, I always move my car anyway, but that's a personal thing. I do feel there should be, and I'm sorry for those people if they don't have friends that they could leave their car with, but I do feel in the business district parking, there should be some kind of time limit. I certainly agree with Councilman Ellis. There needs to be some kind of time limit that also proposed by Councilman Yerger. 18 hours, I think, needs to be expanded. That's for residential. And this is entirely different. And I'm not the business owner downtown as Councilman Ellis is. I think you do need to allow for some time. And he mentioned 72 hours. That would have to be a Monday through Sunday rather than Monday through Friday. That would work all week. Then you're not dividing Monday through Friday. It's this way from whatever time, Saturday and Sunday, it's this time. It will be consistent straight across. And 72 hours would be adequate time for people to have vacation time during the week, leave their car, but also to be able to move it sometimes. And they do need to do that. Yes, I've gone down there a number of times on weekends and night during the day, just to see what it's like. It's the county cars that park there underneath. So their cars, and it's not very many at night. So opening it up and having it in the evening shouldn't be too much of a problem until more adequate housing is sold in downtown, or if we have an influx of people moving in, then we'll have to address it. And I believe we also talked about Norfolk having some rules in place, and then they found that it was very difficult to abide by those rules, and having an open-ended to see what problems might come up and then address it as we go along might be a better way to approach it, because we're not going to be able to address every issue that comes up right now. And I think my time is almost up. Okay, that's great. So I think we need to look at an amendment, and I certainly go with the cities as well, and certainly would like to add an amendment that would change, that would give some teeth to the police, and certainly the time frame on that. So when it's ready for an amendment, let me know if we're discussing, because I would add the amendment that we in the business district parking lots are that it shall be unlawful to park in excess of 72 hours all week long.
Okay. I'd like to have some time for public comment, and then we'll come back and we'll get all this organized here. Again, I'd like to open this up for comments from the public. It's not working tonight. So just, yeah.
Or just speak at the podium, but just speak loud so we can hear you.
I wasn't here at the last, Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont. But I did listen to the audio more than one time, and I got kind of an idea of how some of this transpired. Documents were given out. They're not, and were not presented in our packet for tonight, nor has the public seen them. You had been asked as council for revisions and change and have alternates, and that was actually agreed to. Councilman Ellis wanted teeth for the police to enforce. Councilman Vaughn pushed against the 2-hour limit or said in any caveats, wanted to leave it as is. And Councilwoman Gannon wanted clarity on the parking limits. She thought 18 hours is not long enough, concerns on no overnight street parking. And Councilman Sukren said, just keep it simple, maybe put teeth in it for enforcement. However, on the legal side, Mr. Sullivan said that you aren't codified for the 2 hour, and that needs to be codified because it was an ordinance that was passed but never codified, and that needed to be done. Residential 18-hour time limit is in the code. Thinks anything more could create enforcement headache, and keeping it simple and keep it broad enough so it's inclusive of the CSO. The mayor did agree with the BID that they have no issues with the parking now, but thinks the 2 hour limit between 9 and 5 is good, with a 72-hour max on parking lots, allowing overnights and nothing else above that. Unfortunately, there is no public comment given, and I missed a meeting for the first time in over 6 years, so that's why you had no public comment. But I was disappointed that the agreement was made because Mr. Yerger withdrew his motion on amendment, and Vaughn made the motion to proceed with it based on all the options given during the meeting would be incorporated in tonight's packet, and it wasn't. I don't disagree that a longer time frame has to be there. And in speaking with many individuals in the BID outside of the business district itself, but still captured within that are residential, I can't have my car parked on the street more than 18 hours. If my neighbors complain, or if I'm parked on their side of the street and they don't like it, I have to move my vehicle or it could possibly be towed. I don't know why you would allow anything different unless you change that as well. So that's a consideration. I've had a camper parked on the side of our street. I didn't take issue with it for more than 72 hours. And I understand this is complaint driven. And no, it wasn't my mobile home thing. I'm just saying, put some common sense in it. Take a step back and allow a little time for everybody, including the public, to digest it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the public?
You'll be able to hear me. Too loud. Blair Horner, 1770 North Colson Avenue, Fremont. I work downtown and I'm parked down there quite a bit. I try to be cognizant of the 2 hour limit and go out and move my car. I don't always make it to 2 hours. I think most of us that work down there probably try to do the same thing. Don't quite always make the 2 hours. But I do try. Whatever you guys do here, it needs to be simple, because you've got people like me down there parking, and you're going to turn me into a, someone that's breaking the regulation without really needing to. We're mixing residential with business, which is good for us, and we've got to make it so that it's fair, so that it works for everybody. And I think if you overdo it, it's just going to be tough for everybody to understand and to follow. So be a little careful about what you're doing as far as trying to write in every scenario. You'll never do it. And it's going to cause some problem somewhere if you try to make it a little too tight. I'd leave it a little open-ended. I don't think anybody's going to park an RV down there. And if they do, it seems to me like it'd be pretty easy to write a description that says if you take up more than one spot, then you're probably breaking the parking rules. So I think you could probably get there without too much, and I would hope you would do that.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, Councilman Jensen.
I just wanted to say, I kind of agree with what all's been said here. We should leave it open-ended because we don't know what problems, we don't know everything that we don't know yet. I would just leave this to where I think Councilman Gannon made a fair point, and Councilman Ellis said maybe we do need to make an amendment and put a time limit back in. But I would just make that simple amendment to the city's to what the city staff is proposing and go to third reading.
Councilman Yerger.
Oh, well, I'd definitely be opposed to going to third reading tonight in light of the discussion that we've been having. But in light of being able to respond to, I think, some comment made by Councilman Legman with regards to enforcement and the position of legal and staff with regards to 5408 gives all you need. I would ask council members to turn to the opening paragraph in 408 where it says, that the chief of police shall have the general power in addition to the authority granted therein to remove vehicles from the parking areas in the business, industrial, and residential districts for the purposes of cleaning the streets, controlling traffic, et cetera, et cetera. That's all it says. The paragraph 406 language that I would like to have retained, which was there when was stricken by staff, has to do with the overnight restriction shall not apply to in the sense where, excuse me, I'm in the wrong paragraph. It says that vehicles in the business district for emergencies, maintenance, streets, law enforcement, et cetera, can be moved. And the cost of moving and towing will be paid for by the registered owner of said vehicle. That's the penalty. Paragraph 5408 has no penalty. So the chief of police may be able to tow you, but the city of Fremont, based on 408 as it's written today, can't ticket you. They can tow you, but there isn't anything in 408 that gives the police chief the authority to say, oh yeah, and if we do that, it's at your expense. And that's the kind of signage that you would have downtown that says this is prohibited parking. Violators will be ticketed and towed at their own expense. So that it would be clear. So 408 and 421, I truly feel need to have that additional language if you're looking to make sure that legal or that law enforcement can enforce rather than to just call a tow truck and have you towed and not have provisions for you to have to pay to get it out of the tow yard. There are plenty of other arguments here with regards to whether or not there's a legitimate reason to argue that the general public should park in the public streets downtown overnight. I can't think of a specific reason as to why the general public would be at home parking overnight rather than at their homes. And that creates problems potentially during storm removal, other kinds of activity. If you don't have a calling database to move those vehicles and they're not listening to the broadcast, they won't move those vehicles. And we're not to the point where we're registering downtown parking. But ultimately, when we get 30, 40, 50 apartment dwellers living downtown, you're going to need a mechanism to contact those individuals uniquely to clear the area if need be for an emergency or snow removal. Today, the city has broadcast messages that go out to the city for snow emergency, but for the downtown business district, parkers specifically to get a message to move off the street and into a parking lot, we don't have that capability. These ordinances won't deal with that yet. We'll probably have to tackle that when it happens. But I think it is extremely important for us to manage the parking lots with some time limits. And it's extremely important that we give enough authority to law enforcement to ticket and tow, and for the owners to be responsible for the expense, not the city. So that was in large measure what I was attempting to get into code that I felt was not in the proposals by staff. I certainly welcome the opportunities that others have said. This needs further work. We can and we should have been blending these more succinctly into one version. I certainly am open to that, but I'm certainly not open to closing this out and going to third reading today.
Councilman Ellis.
So a couple of things that were brought up by the citizen is legal mentioned that we needed to codify the 2 hours. Is that being taken care of here?
Yep, the previous ordinance that was.
Okay, so the 2 hour limit, parking 9 to 5 on the streets, parking overnight is okay after 5 o'clock. You can park as long as you want. I agree with the other citizen that mentioned we need to keep this simple. I think if you just, the 2 hour limit on the streets, it's been out there. The signs have been out there forever. We don't enforce it. It's just a tool that can be used by the police if they need to. And I think just adding a very, very simple amendment, 72-hour limit in a parking lot gives the police a tool that they can use if they need to. So I think that's about the only amendment that I'd like to see tonight. But I'd also, again, like to just make that amendment, put this thing in hard writing and let people look at it and marinate it before we go to third reading. There's really no hurry. Again, we're not going to have residents down there. We're not going to be invoking anything for several months now. So the BID will be meeting in a week. And so they could, kind of give us their thumbs up with our changes. We can come back and make a final vote on this next meeting. Thank you.
Councilman Vaughn.
My question is if Councilman Jensen, was that an official motion that you had put forth?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Go ahead.
In section 408, in the last paragraph, and this is, I'm reading from Councilmember Yerger's version. This is not in red. It says about in the middle of the paragraph, it says the cost of towing such vehicles shall be paid by the registered owner. So that's already in section 408. We don't need to add anything for that. There is a sentence that's on the top of page 255 of your packet that has a very nice succinct sentence about in business district parking lots, it shall be unlawful to park in excess. And this one says 18 hours, but you could turn it to the 78 hours, or excuse me, 72 hours if you choose. And I would like to address Councilmember Ellis's comment about we're in no hurry. I am contacted every 2 weeks by the developers of the 505 building because they have tenants that are concerned about their ability to park. Where shall they park and how long can they park? And so apparently he has some tenants that are hesitant to sign until they know for sure what the council is choosing to do. So I would just share that information with you.
Okay. I'll just say, I mean, this has been a very comprehensive process, and I think we've had a very open process, open-minded process. I mean, when we brought this first ordinance for first reading, it definitely had flaws. I mean, and that's part of the legislative process of what we're going through with 3 readings. We had the first reading, we had public comment, we came back for second reading, we had changes to that. We had, council comment, we had public, comment. Are we going to find a perfect solution to this problem? No. I mean, we need to work with an ordinance. I mean, before this, we didn't have anything. So we're having a lot of great development downtown, a lot of good things happening. I think what's before you tonight from the city standpoint is something that is simple, something that we can work with, something that has teeth attached to it. And, who's to say we don't revisit this at a later date after we see how it works. But I think at this point we have debated, we met with the BID. This is our 3rd reading. I feel like it's time to make a decision on something, on moving forward with this, getting it in place, seeing how it works and moving on and moving forward. So Councilman Yerger.
I want to point out one thing with regards to staff's suggestion that 408 has everything it needs to enforce. And if you read on into that paragraph, it says they are authorized to have such vehicles removed from the streets, period. It's nothing about business district parking lots or other parking areas, streets. Because I think this still needs some further refinement, albeit maybe we're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. I make a privileged motion to continue this item to the next meeting.
Is there a second? Councilman Ellis?
I'll second that.
Okay. Cast your votes to continue.
Motion fails 2-5.
I would open the floor if there is amendment. Councilman Vaughn.
We make a motion to approve as written with the caveat of the 72-hour maximum being added in.
So I guess technically there hasn't been an amendment made yet. There's a suggested amendment. So is your motion to adopt the amendment suggested with the addition that there's a 72-hour time limit?
Correct.
So that'd be the first amendment being made.
Yes.
I just want to make sure what we have in the council packet for city, that is an amendment to the second reading, right? So we would first need to make a motion to amend, right? In the packet, and then we can get to the motion to amend for 72 hours. Am I following you right?
You could do it either way, but if you want it set those two distinctly separated.
If we can do it in one, I'm fine. If that's what Councilman Vaughn wants to do it, I just want to be clear that we can do that.
Yeah, no amendment has been proposed or moved yet by the council. So this would be the first amendment being made, adopting all of the suggested, I guess we'll call it option A, and include the 72-hour time limit.
Okay,
Correct. That is my motion.
okay, thank you for the clarification. Councilman Vaughn, or Councilman Legband,
And I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
Okay, I would take a motion then to approve ordinance 5615 as amended and hold final reading. Councilman Jensen,
We'll make that motion.
Councilman Sukram,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
We'll now have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending chapter 5, article 4 of the Fremont Municipal Code, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance and providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect on final reading.
Okay, cast your final vote.
Mayor, the ordinance is approved 6-1.
Moving on to item 22, ordinance 5619, requesting change the zone on properties generally bounded by 9th Street on the south, 15th Street on the north, 8th Street on the west, and Park Street on the east from suburban commercial to auto urban residential. This would be second reading.
Mayor, members of the council, Jennifer Gant, planning director. This is the second reading of the request to change the zoning in this area from commercial to residential. As I mentioned in the last meeting, this area is residentially developed and the majority of the historic district that is on the National Register. Staff recommends approval, planning commission recommends approval. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Jensen?
Just refresh my memory. Was there a reason we didn't want to move this to third and final reading?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, any additional comments from council? If there are none, I would take a motion to hold second reading of ordinance 5619. Councilwoman Ganem,
So moved.
okay. Councilman Yerger,
I'll second your motion for second reading, although don't favor moving to third reading on zoning issues.
cast your vote.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We'll now have second reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally located between 9th and 15th Streets and between North H and North Park Streets from SC Suburban Commercial to AR Auto Urban Residential, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on second reading.
Councilman Jensen,
I'm going to make the motion request to waive and move to third and final reading on ordinance 5619.
Councilwoman Ganem,
I'll second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
We'll now have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally located between 9th and 15th Streets and between North H and North Park Streets from SC Suburban Commercial to AR Auto Urban Residential, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading.
Okay, cast your final vote, ordinance 5619.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
All right, moving on to new business is item 23, ordinance 5620, amending current electric rate ordinance, rate schedule economic development service. Of staff report from Utility General Manager Jeff Shanahan.
Mayor, City Council, Jeff Shanahan, Utility General Manager. We reviewing the rate ordinances, found that this one had an error in the demand charge for economic development. Basically, it says on the lesser of the highest demand or 5,000 kilowatts, that should say the greater of the highest 15 minutes or 5,000 kilowatts. And then we added a section C, that in the event that it was done by contract, there could be a different value or level placed on that.
Any questions? Councilman Legband?
So this basically was just a clerical error. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you. Comments from the public? Seeing none. Additional comments from council? Councilman Vaughn?
Would this be something we could move to a third and final and get over with?
Yes, that was part of the recommendation, is that we could implement it right away once we find something like this.
Thank you. So moved.
Okay. Councilman Jensen?
And I will second.
Okay. Cast your votes to introduce and hold first reading.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We'll now have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, establishing rate schedules for electricity consumed by customers of the municipal electric system, defining terms, repealing ordinance number 5564 and all other ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance, providing when the rate schedules are effective and providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect on first reading.
Okay, there's a request to suspend rules and move to final reading. Take a motion in that regard. Councilman Vaughn?
So moved.
Councilman Sukram?
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, we'll now have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, establishing rate schedules for electricity consumed by customers of the municipal electric system, defining terms, repealing ordinance number 5564 and all other ordinances or part of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance, providing when the rate schedules are effective and providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect on final reading.
Cast your final vote.
Mayor, the ordinance is approved 7-0.
Moving on to item 24, resolution 2022-101 to approve Emmy Collins Contracting Company, Inc. Final acceptance of project the Johnson Road South Union Pacific Railroad crossing improvements.
Close out Johnson Road Railroad section project. Johnson Road was paved 2 years ago from Jackson Drive essentially to Morningside Road. We had some issues getting permits with railroad, so we skipped that segment when we make line paving. So this project was to pave that area where the railroad tracks are, approximately 300 long section. Original contract price on this job was $274,219. The final project cost was $358,207.58. Net change for change orders of $87,107.61. So change orders 1 and 2. Change order 1 was at the request of Department of Utilities. They were going to build a driveway into the whole yard, basically into the warehouse. And they approached us as, could we just get a price from the contractor to do it? At the same time that we did $7,494.80. Change order 2 was $29,365.81, and that was for a storm sewer pipe that was on the south side of the tracks that we didn't realize was there. Picked up during the survey because and we did the construction and disposed it. So what you're approving tonight is the final project cost, accepting the project, accepting the final quantities, and accepting the 2 change orders. So the overall price increase was $83,980.58. Of this resolution, you're approving those items that I just spoke of.
Councilman Legban.
Yeah, that new approach that was 57,000, do we get reimbursed from that? Does the city get reimbursed from the utility company?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Or they would just pay that segment.
Councilman Yerger.
Dave, you and I talked earlier today about the resolution 2022-101 and the numerics that appear in the whereas statements and the now be it therefore statement. I think we came to some agreement that the whereas statements can stand as is, but the now be it therefore resolved statement needed some modification. And with that and your concurrence, I'd like to offer an amendment to the now be it resolved statement to say approving final change order and final payment in the amount of $84,051.62, which is the amount that we're going to write the check for. It is not going to be $83,990. So I offer the language that I just offered as an amendment to resolution 2022-101 with staff's concurrence.
Okay. Councilman Legban.
If that was a motion, okay, I will second it.
Okay. Motion to amend the resolution to include the language. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
I'd take a motion to approve as amended. Councilman Vaughn.
So moved.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes. Councilman Legban, can you please vote?
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, take a motion to adjourn. Councilman Jensen.
So moved.
Councilman Sukram. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone. Tyler, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.